Across the frosted glass of the negotiation table, the heat rippled. A thick, curling wisp of vapor twisted upward from a small ceramic vessel. In a diplomatic conservatory strictly maintained at exactly 18 degrees Celsius, absolutely nothing should have produced that kind of thermal output. Evacuation. Immediate. Code red. Shattered the silence was a single, frantic klaxon. Through the overhead audio feeds, a chaotic, overlapping staccato thudded against the acoustic panels. The Fanashi delegation's cardiac rhythms were redlining. 300 beats per minute. 400. Pure, unadulterated biological terror. Ambassador Vel could only stare at the human delegate. She did not run. She simply held the white cylinder. The thermal alarms haven't stopped ringing since. And honestly, they probably never will. 20 minutes earlier, the greatest threat to galactic stability had been a typo on page 4 of the tariff agreement. Under the soft, bioluminescent glow of the sealing spores, Ambassador Vel checked his datapad. He smoothed the heavy gold tassels of his ceremonial sash. Again, protocol dictated every movement. Trade Summit 447 represented 5 solar cycles of exhaustive negotiation, and Vel was determined to see the treaty signed. Across the massive circular table sat the Fanashi Minister of Commerce. His translucent, liquid-based physiology pulsed with a slow, rhythmic contentment in the humid chill. 18 degrees represented absolute perfection for their species. Their survival margin was notoriously thin. Anything approaching 40 degrees triggered spontaneous cellular boiling. The requested shipping corridors remain unacceptable, the minister gurgled. His vocalizer translated the fluid shifting of his internal bladders into a harsh, metallic rasp. Standard human cargo holds operate at 22 degrees. That temperature degrades our primary exports before they even reach the distribution hubs. Vel tapped the polished surface of the diplomatic register. The human delegation requires those specific thermal parameters for basic life support, Minister. Then the humans must adapt. Before Vel could cite the biological impossibility of that demand, the heavy reinforced doors of the conservatory slid apart. Entered Representative Petra Yolin. She carried no datapad. She wore no ceremonial robes. Clutched tightly in her right hand was a simple, thick-walled white mug. A dark, pungent aroma invaded the room, cutting sharply through the cloying scent of wet soil and blooming orchids. "Apologies for the delay," Petra said. She pulled out her chair, the metal legs screeching loudly against the stone floor. Logistics meeting ran long. Vel's ocular ridges tightened. He focused intently on her hands. Specifically, he focused on the vessel she held. A steady stream of vapor cascaded from the rim. The minister leaned backward, his gelatinous form flattening slightly against the specialized contours of his environmental chair. "Representative Yolin, you bring a cooling beverage to these proceedings." "Just breakfast," she replied. She raised the rim toward her face. Then, she executed a deliberate, sustained exhalation directly over the dark liquid. Vel froze. His secondary heart skipped a beat. Why would she do that? He checked his concealed biometric scanner beneath the table. The surface of that liquid was radiating immense, terrifying energy. By blowing across it, she was intentionally dispersing a localized thermal cloud directly into the minister's breathing space. A raw display of atmospheric dominance. She was proving, without a single word, that her species could weaponize the very air. "Regarding the shipping corridors," Petra continued, completely ignoring the minister's subtle physical recoil, "I reviewed your counterproposal. It cuts our transit efficiency by 30%. Safety protocols demand it," the minister countered, though his vocalizer pitched slightly higher. "Your vessels generate too much ambient exhaust. So we insulate the cargo bays." Petra set the white mug down. A sharp clink of ceramic against glass echoed in the large chamber. "We install secondary cryosheathing around your specific crates. but we aren't altering the core NA routes. The cost of secondary sheathing is astronomical, the minister argued. Cheaper than losing the entire sector's supply chain, she fired back. She picked up the vessel again. The vapor continued to swirl. Vel watched her fingers closely. Bare skin, no protective shielding. She was gripping the outside of a container holding a substance hot enough to trigger a localized environmental warning. His own species, the Thessani, possessed thick, scale-armored digits designed for harsh environments. Even he would have required a heavy thermal gauntlet to handle something producing that much steam. Yet, the human's flesh remained pale and completely unblistered. She brought the rim to her lips. She did not flinch. She did not scream. Instead, she consumed the liquid fire. A long, resonant sigh escaped her lips. Through his diplomatic earpiece, Vel heard the steady, unbothered thud of her heart monitor. 72 beats per minute. Calm. Grounded. The environmental sensors in the room immediately registered a minute spike in ambient humidity. Vel's mind raced through the terrifying implications. To ingest a biohazard of that magnitude meant her internal organs possessed an incomprehensible durability. Was this a subtle physical threat? An intimation that any Finashi boarding party would be instantly incinerated by the sheer ambient heat of a human crew's diet? Perhaps, Petra said, her voice entirely steady. We could compromise on transit times, shorter jumps, more frequent stops. Stops require recalibration, the minister stated. The translucent fluid inside his cranium swirled faster now, the rising internal pressure evident. And recalibration requires downtime. Unacceptable. We can authorize hot coffee breaks for the dock crews, Petra offered. A brief, asymmetrical pull of her facial muscles transformed her expression. The human smile boosts productivity. The minister did not comprehend the cultural reference. Neither did Vel. But the Finashi leader fixated solely on the vapor still rising relentlessly from the human's hands. Representative, the minister asked, the metallic rasp of his translator trembling. What exact thermal output is that substance currently emitting? Vel smoothed the heavy gold tassels of his ceremonial sash. Downward he pressed the braided fabric, ensuring the intricate knots aligned perfectly against his secondary sternum. He focused entirely on the familiar, rough friction of the silk beneath his scaled digits, waiting for the translation matrix to process the human's response. A routine protocol adjustment grounded him in a moment of sheer unpredictability. Actually, 60 degrees, Petra answered. She tilted the thick-walled white cylinder forward slightly, exposing the dark, oily surface of the beverage. Celsius. We drink it near boiling. 140 Fahrenheit if you prefer the old metrics. Vel stared at the swirling vapor. The terrifying truth he suddenly understood. She had not exhaled across the surface to demonstrate atmospheric dominance over the minister. To cool the drink down, she had simply blown on it. The human worked as a beverage specialist, a sommelier on her homeworld. This was not a weapon of mass casualty smuggled past orbital security. This was her standard morning consumption. Required for baseline wakefulness was this blistering chemical concoction. Down her pale, unarmored throat slid the boiling roast without a single tremor. Rose from the minister's translucent cranial sac a violent cascade of bubbles. That exact numerical value, his fluid-based physiology simply could not process without facing structural collapse. Across Vel's polished diplomatic console, crimson warning glyphs flared to life. By the automated environmental scanners, a desperate biological calculation was being performed in real time. Human baseline core temperature registered at an impossibly low 37 Celsius. Finashi thermal shock threshold stood firmly at a maximum of 40. Ingesting a substance at that extreme temperature should have instantly flash-boiled the mammalian digestive tract, rupturing delicate internal vessels and causing immediate catastrophic hemorrhaging. Along her esophagus, the heat transfer alone should have caused third-degree burns. Instead, into her dense muscular mass, the extreme thermal energy safely dissipated without a single physiological failure. The scanners simply could not reconcile the physics of her survival. Code red. Absolute biological emergency. In the front row of the lower observation tier, a young Fanashi clerk named Liar frantically tapped his transcription interface. Petra shifted her weight, stepping slightly forward to address the minister directly regarding the shipping lanes. The sudden movement brought the ceramic mug within half a meter of the clerk's low desk. From the dark brew, a fresh wave of ambient heat radiated outward, displacing the carefully regulated 18-degree air. It struck Liar's left shoulder frill, hissed the translucent membrane instantly. Liar dropped his metallic stylus as the delicate respiratory tissue bubbled, melting into a viscous puddle of glowing fluid right across the digital datapad screen. Chaos consumed the humid conservatory. Out of their specialized ergonomic chairs, the entire Fanashi delegation scrambled backward in uncoordinated terror. The minister did not wait for his security detail. Spilled across the stone floor was the nutrient broth from his own feeding tube as he ripped the foreline from his arm. His vocalizer emitted a continuous, high-pitched mechanical squeal, demanding immediate cryogenic extraction. The primary trade agreement, they abandoned entirely on the frosted glass table, the heavy parchment pages scattering. Vel watched his 5 solar cycles of meticulous diplomatic maneuvering evaporate into the mist. His personal standing within the attaché corps no longer mattered. The localized negotiations were officially dead. Worse, the entire Fanashi galactic star chart was currently being rewritten in the central database. Humans were immediately reclassified by the fleeing council members as walking thermodynamic anomalies. Their bodies contained enough latent heat to destabilize a cryoship just by boarding it. Sharing a standardized shipping lane with a species that casually ingested molten intake now constituted an extinction-level threat. The requested 30% buffer zone was no longer a negotiation tactic. It was a desperate planetary defense strategy. Through the overhead audio feeds, the frantic, overlapping staccato of Fanashi cardiac rhythms thudded against the acoustic panels. 300 beats per minute. For 100. The massive chamber, they evacuated in less than 40 seconds, leaving behind knocked-over chairs and melted recording devices. The heavy reinforced blast doors slammed shut, physically sealing the perceived thermal anomaly inside the room. Beneath the flashing crimson emergency lights, Petra Yolin remained standing alone. She pulled out a heavy chair and sat down at the empty table. The thick ceramic vessel was raised to her mouth once more. A small sip was taken. On the primary diplomatic monitor, the localized biometric readout continued to scroll across the cracked glass. Internal core stable at 37. External intake holding at 60. The environmental sensors isolated a single auditory pulse beneath the wailing warning sirens. 72 beats per minute.